Welcome to you and welcome to this special broadcast from Mauritius. And I'm joined here by Javier Duval, who is Vice Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and Economic Development. We've got Tarun Gulati, who is the Group President and CEO of Braemar Corporation and Vice Chairman of Braemar Bank. We have Richard Arlove, who is CEO of ABAC Services, and we have Afsa Ibrahim, who is the Deputy Managing Partner of BDO at Mauritius. I'm David Williams, normally talking to you from Johannesburg, but delighted to be here in Mauritius. My first time here, and I know already it's not going to be the last. But let's start with you, Vice Prime Minister. I think let's look at the big picture here. Mauritius, an island 3,000 kilometers off the coast of Africa, perhaps not taken seriously as a business venue, as an investment venue for a long time. But in recent years, you've been positioning yourself firstly as a potential major partner for mutual benefit with many countries in Africa.
Absolutely. We have now an Africa strategy which is recognized worldwide as being very effective. Now, the first thing to say is that Mauritius fully understands the long-term development potential of Africa. And we want to be a partner to that development. We want to offer a mutually beneficial relationship with the rest of the continent. That is very important. We don't want people to see Mauritius as just a fiscal jurisdiction where, in fact, the taxes are relatively low. We want people to see the whole of Mauritius. Mauritius being now the most competitive economy in Africa. Mauritius being in the top 10 worldwide for economic freedom, in the top 20 worldwide for ease of doing business. Mauritius having recently been upgraded by Moody's. These are all the things that make Mauritius an extremely diversified economy. With financial services being about 10% of GDP, but with many, many other things that make up the Mauritian economy, that make up the Mauritian people. And we want all this potential that Mauritius has to be at the disposal of the African continent so that we have a sustainable, long-term relationship. And for that to be so, it has to be a win-win situation that everybody has something to gain out of that relationship.
Well, our conversation today is going to go into some of the detail of how people can come here and what the advantages are of doing so. But why don't you set the scene first? And looking at your numbers, your inflation numbers, your GDP numbers and so on, it just looks almost too good to be true. In a world where Europe is struggling to recover, the US has tapering and the fiscal cliff last year. The East, well, is that growth going to continue? Africa, high growth rates. South Africa, we are now downgraded to 1.9% as the growth target. Yes. Now, give us a picture of the Mauritian economy, which, as I say, seems almost too good to be true.
Yes, thank you. I mean, the opposition here and public opinion always putting pressure on us and not being satisfied. But in truth, we are doing reasonably well compared to many, many other nations. Our per capita income now is $9,300. Which puts us as a higher middle income country. Now, within the next 6 years, we want to become a high income country, and that sort of puts a lot of pressure on us to get things right. Inflation this year is very reasonable at 3.5%. Growth at 3.2%. It might be 3.3 by the end of the year, but again, that's very good if you look at the fact that our main market, Europe, is in fact in crisis, has been in crisis since 2008. So things are reasonably good. We have a fairly low public debt, about 54%. And our foreign exchange reserves are very high, in fact, at 27% of GDP. So the situation is good. We have obviously a plan now how to move ahead from that. We see Europe hopefully coming out of the tunnel in the near future, hopefully. And if that happens, then our growth rate will increase, but we are also not waiting for Europe. We are diversifying to other markets, Asia, Africa, in terms of our tourism, in terms of our textile products, for instance. But we're also diversifying into new sectors of the economy. We can talk about that. Marine services, petroleum hub, marine exploration. These are the things that we're looking at. And of course, we believe that Mauritius should be a hub for this region, a talent hub, a hub for education, a hub for medical services. We want to fully participate in the African success story.
Well, there are a lot of things that we can come back to there, and the word hub keeps coming up, a hub for different purposes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does sound like a very good concept. But let's now look and talk to the rest of our panel here, and let's start with you, Tarun Gulati, who is from Braemar Bank. As a banker, you live here, but you haven't only lived here. So why come to Mauritius?
I tell you, I've lived in about 7 countries across the globe, from Hong Kong to Thailand, Middle East, UK. Mauritius is fantastic, robust legislation, very, very tough regulator here. Liquidity position, banks are solid. No issues during the crisis. I can tell you Mauritius is all going for it. Time zone wise, fantastic. You can be trading, sitting here and looking at America. You can be looking at the UK and still trade across the day. I think it's a sort of place where you can settle down pretty easily as an expat. Fun place. My golfing skills have improved, I can promise you. Sun is shining, people are envious of you. So it's the sort of place where you want to come to, but more importantly, business. You know, you're sort of sitting there as an hub and spoke to Africa. Safe place. I can't name any other place in the world where I've lived in or traveled where you have a temple, a mosque, and a church all sitting side by side. Now that's fantastic. So, you know, you need a place where there's infrastructure. Connectivity is improving. The Prime Minister set some things in motion now, which will improve them even further. So you can travel from here, go across, and come back on the same day to some places. So it's fantastic in that sense. And on the economy side, I can tell you one thing, that, you know, I mean, a shot has been fired across India's bows recently, or a possible downgrade. Mauritius, I think the Vice Prime Minister was pretty modest in what he said. I think upgrade here. You haven't seen that in many other places. You know, the inflation rates are high in many places, particularly India, double digit. Most of the world gets a sort of a cold and a fever looking at the US when they see that the economy is doing pretty well now, things are looking up. And what happens if tapering happens? So
well,
they're all concerned.
When I was on the aeroplane, just before we took off from Johannesburg, they say we're now going to spray the plane. That's one of the regulations, and I suppose the financial contamination hasn't got here either, whatever else you're spraying for, the financial contaminations, because Mauritius does seem to be insulated.
Very well insulated. In fact, the crisis hasn't impacted it much, because I think whilst you have 21 banks here, pretty healthy competition, while some would argue that there could be a 2-tier sort of strategy for smaller banks and emerging banks as opposed to larger banks. But having said that, pretty clean. You can operate here. The market, don't just look at Mauritius, look at the hub and spoke model you mentioned earlier. Look at Africa. And that's where I think part of the budget is focused on that. And there are various initiatives that the Vice Prime Minister has initiated, which augurs very well for the economy.
Well, we're going to talk to each of you first and then perhaps drill down into a bit more detail into some of those. Richard, CEO of ABAC Services, give me the context for your company. I said Tarun was a banker, so I have an idea what he does.
Yes.
What do you do and why are you here?
In fact, ABAC is, I would say ABAC rather than ABAC, but anyway, ABAC is an administrator and financial services provider. So we provide financial services, corporate administration. What we do is basically we help companies and individuals that want to structure in Mauritius and provide them with all the services, helping them to structure for investments outside of Mauritius. That is mainly what we do. But alongside that, we're responsible for making sure that these companies are fully compliant with Mauritian laws, that they have the right amount of substance to, in fact, ensure that they are true Mauritian companies. So these are the services we provide. A lot of administration, financial services, advice about corporate and financial administration. Yeah.
Now, it's a French-speaking country in my mind, yet everyone can also speak English. So clearly that, in terms of Africa, most countries in Africa are Anglophone or Francophone.
Right. Yeah.
Sounds like you can do both from here.
Yes, we can indeed. We can, and that's a big advantage because we can service the clients that are pan-African. Because as you said, most countries are either English-speaking or French-speaking. And so Francophone Africa is in need of places like Mauritius to be able to facilitate FDI into their countries. And Mauritius plays that role for Francophone as well, obviously, as Anglophone. And I think it's interesting what you just said. I think one of the big advantages that we have is linked to our history. This country had no inhabitants at the beginning. So the Dutch came, then they went out, the French came for about 100 years, then the British came for 150 years. So we are truly and naturally bilingual, and culturally as well. Because then when slavery was abolished, people from Asia, principally from India, came over as laborers. So today when you look at the mix of population, it's about 70% of people from Indian origin, and then the rest is really a mixture of European, African, Chinese. So when someone comes to Mauritius, and maybe I should ask you the question, in which continent did you feel you are? Do you feel you're in Africa, in Europe, in Asia? So it may not be that easy to answer this question, because we're truly like a melting pot of the different countries. So that provides us with a cultural diversity and language diversity that facilitates international business.
You're quite right, because while I've been here, I've been looking at the architecture and thinking, where do we place this? And as you say, the different origins are so obvious, but they blended as well. So it's a very interesting mixture. And well placed, as we said at the beginning, in its geographic position in terms of time zones and distance to different continents. Afsar Ibrahim is the Deputy Managing Partner at BDO Mauritius. Afsar, also a Mauritian, and your perspective from doing business here.
Well, Mauritius has diversified from a monocrop economy in the early 70s to be today financial services jurisdictions of repute and of substance. Mauritius today offers much more than tourism, than its a low-tax jurisdiction. We are today becoming a center for capital, be it for raising of equity, be it for debt, but more importantly, a center for human capital. We have first-class professionals working here, be it in the legal profession, in the accounting profession, or in the company administration. I think all this together gives Mauritius a competitive advantage, which is rather unique in this part of the world. And we would like to play this role into bringing investments, not only into Mauritius, but also investment by Mauritian companies into Africa, and also facilitating those who want to use Mauritius as a gateway. So it's investment in Mauritius, by Mauritius, and from Mauritius into Africa.
Well, I got a little bit of a nice history lesson there from Richard, which I hadn't asked you for, but I'm so glad you did, because you just gave us a brief summary of how Mauritius as a nation came about. But let's come back to the Vice Prime Minister, Javier Duval, again. The mention there was of a one-crop or a one-product economy. And I must say, my image of it, ignorance, was sugar and tourism, because from South Africa we always hear about Mauritius as a tourist destination, but that was my image of it. Now it's a lot more than that, partly in terms of what you produce, but also this concept of an intellectual hub. But just take us back again and give us a bit of context here. How did you get from that pretty one-dimensional economy to where you are now?
People are a bit surprised when I say this, but I recognize the contribution of each and every government since independence to bring us to what we are.
Which was when?
Here.
Just remind us.
1968, so about more than 45 years ago. So in fact, we had visionary leaders at the start. Firstly, they kept us as a democracy. They kept the old capital base. Everything stayed in place, and we built from there. Now, if we go back now to 40 years ago or so, there was 1 or 2 airlines servicing Mauritius at that time, once a week probably. But we still had the vision to become a tourism destination, and we made it by getting Mauritius on the headlines around the world. And we slowly became a high-class tourism destination from virtually nothing. And then we made use of the various treaties we had to develop our textiles sector. And in fact, someone had the idea of putting up factories here, importing the raw materials from Asia and exporting to Europe and USA. So we became a textile manufacturing place, a tourism destination. And then from then on, in the 1980s, late 1980s, the Financial Services Center started to develop on the back of the many professionals that we had here. And then we went from there. With ICT, we became a call center destination, and so on and so forth. And you can see that every single government since independence added to that. There's not been really any major differences in terms of economic vision. The opposition and the government have the same basic economic vision. All we talk about is who's going to do it better than the other. And that has been, in fact, one of the reasons for the success story. We haven't had stop-go policies. We've just had policies which add on to each other. And today, I think, as I mentioned before, we need to continue the diversification because we see that there are some issues with our main market, Europe. We see also these opportunities developing in Africa. We see opportunities developing in Asia. For instance, we are nowadays back to the position we were in the 18th century as a star and key of the Indian Ocean.
The star and key.
And key. That is our motto. Mauritius is the star and key of the Indian Ocean. And in fact, nowadays, with a huge increase in traffic, maritime traffic between Asia and Africa and Europe, the difficulties in the Suez Canal, the piracy, etc. This route is now becoming a very, very popular route. And so Mauritius is redeveloping, I must use that word, redeveloping its maritime services sector so that we will increase the bunkering, will increase the ship channeling, all to do with maritime services. That will increase the transshipment. That will allow feeder services to the African continent, because that is one issue that we have in all of Africa, is the connectivity issue, not just between Mauritius and the rest of Africa, but between African capitals. So we have the marine services. We also have this fantastic new air terminal that we've built, which is very comfortable for transit and for passengers generally. And we want to see an aviation hub develop. Cargo, air services, and passenger services develop. And we already have fantastic services to China, to Australia, to the rest of Europe, etc., to Europe, etc. And we want our airport to be the hub for the region, and our port to be the marine services hub. So we see Mauritius again as developing as the star. I hope it's not too presumptuous of us, but as a star and key of this region.
I like the term star and key. I'm going to come to Tarun in a moment to talk about, what problems face bankers and how they might be solved in Mauritius from that point of view. But I want to ask one more question about the macro area, and I think it's so interesting because we talk on CNBC about all the world's economies and we analyze them. And then you have the debates. So there's austerity. Should we cut back on government spending? Then, no, we must spend. And it seems we've got two extremes. We've got the US, which buys $85 billion worth of bonds every month. Yes. And they're terrified they're going to taper this, as the phrase goes. Yes. Then you've got Europe, with Greece being reduced to emerging market status. So half the countries in Europe are bankrupt, carried along by Germany. You seem to have avoided either of those. How would you characterize your economic policy? Because you in many countries, you run the risk of being seen as socialist or capitalist or conservative or liberal, and those labels often don't work very well. So how would you categorize your management of your economy?
We've tried to give some fiscal stimulus to the economy. Our annual budget deficit runs around 3%. Sometimes in a good year it will be less, sometimes a bit more. So there's some fiscal stimulus. We've also, one issue that we have, like many economies, exporting economies, is we have spare capacity. We have a crisis of demand arising from our main market being in difficulty. Now, obviously, when the hotel occupancy rates are lower, you'll have less investment in new hotels, and same for virtually every area of the economy. So we do have spare capacity in the economy. To be able to counteract that, we have stepped up government expenditure. So government capital expenditure, the roads have been, there's a tremendous investment in the road system, for instance, in Mauritius, and now we're going for the light railway. We've had the new airport, large developments in the port, etc. So we are looking at capital expenditure to supplement the deficiency, if you like, in the private sector investment, which is quite normal at this stage of our development.
But what that's doing is creating the conditions for more investment. It's not just spending.
Absolutely. We have one area is to have a reasonably high capital investment from the government side, but also we are identifying new opportunities for the private sector. We want them to invest in the bunkering, for instance. We want to go for marine exploration, petrol and gas, and also mineral deposits. So we also identifying and accompanying our private sector into new development. Now, we've set up the Mauritius Africa Fund, where we want to accompany our private sector into investments into Africa, because we believe that with government participation, it gives greater visibility and greater assurance to our African partners. So it's also, the Mauritian economy, the development since independence has been a partnership between public and the private sectors. Yeah. We often identify areas of investment the private sector follows, and we provide the incentives that need to be provided. And this, we see that continuing into the future.
Tarun, a banker. Banks are being increasingly regulated after the big crisis. They've got to have more capital reserves. They've got to have more safeguards in place. So it was always a highly regulated and quite bureaucratic environment, more so now. The last thing they want is where a country actually makes it more difficult for them to do business than it is already. So how does Mauritius compare? Well, let me put it another way. What are the problems that bankers globally see, bankers in Africa? What are the issues that they're trying to deal with? And why would they come to Mauritius to solve those problems?
Well, you'll be surprised. A lot of people are looking at Mauritius as setting up their holding companies here. And why is that? Because as I mentioned earlier, the regulator is robust. Legislation is pretty transparent. And you know, it's a safe country to work from. So they want to set up shop here. Now, across Africa, I mean, you'll see mergers and acquisitions will increase. People looking at it as a market where you can see the per capita incomes going up, youthful population, and the population is growing, and you'll find a market which is second to none. Some of the top 7 economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa, so it all augurs very well there. But having said that, taking a cue from what the Vice Prime Minister said, this particular fund, the Africa Fund, which I think you set aside 500 million, actually could translate into 5 billion of investments, because they're looking to put in 10% of equity. So what does that mean? Private-public partnership, you know, it all facilitates that sort of stuff. And what happens beyond that is, globally, people are finding, look, regulations are not going to get any less. The headwinds will remain strong. Having said that, this government facilitates business. So the hub and spoke model, acting as a gateway, is all working from here. You got the skill set, you got the talent, infrastructure is not nascent anymore, it's improving every day. The connectivity, Vice Prime Minister, you mentioned tourism. I'll actually say there's business facilitation there. 5 flights to China, connectivity to Russia. You mentioned languages. I mean, languages, schools are being set up. It all augurs very, very well for business. And don't just look at the 1.3 million people in Mauritius. Africa's star is rising. Look at Mauritius as a key destination from which you can operate in and out of Africa. And that's what facilitates banks. So where I'm sitting, I see this is, you know, it's a fantastic place to be in. I wouldn't be any other place at this point in time when you want to do business with the last frontier in the world. So, you know, where you mentioned economies of the world are struggling, this is the place to be in today.
If I may just add on this, David, I think a slightly different perspective add on to what Tarun has just said. I think one set of figures which we need to remind ourselves of is that although our GDP per capita is among the highest, as the Vice Prime Minister said, on the African continent, our total GDP is relatively small. We're just a small nation of 1.3 million people. So the total GDP is about, I think, $13 billion, roughly $13 billion, which is relatively small for a country. However, when you look at the assets under administration of all these global business companies that use Mauritius as a platform for investing from here to elsewhere in the world, there are about 12,000 of such companies and funds. The total assets under administration is about 500 billion, I think in excess of 500 billion. So when you think about that, the throughput of capital, of money that has gone through Mauritius banking system, because all these companies need to have their banks in Mauritius, their accounts audited in Mauritius, their board meetings run out of Mauritius, all the substance control and management is here. When I say these 500 billion, the accountants, the administrators, the bankers, we're all involved in administering this money. Okay, we've signed for these monies. So our head is on the table for these monies. We're responsible for it. So, and I think this is an important element of the whole thing, because as you were saying, 1.3 million people, but effectively it's much more when you look at Africa. In terms of financing as well, there's a lot of money which goes through our financial systems in Mauritius. And that's why the regulatory environment is key, so that we make sure that this money is clean, has gone through all the New York clients, anti-money laundering regulations and so on. So this is clean money, and this is why, in fact, because we sit on the board of all these clients, we are in fact in connection with them. We do see lots of projects lots of people who have projects in Africa, for example, who are interested to find financing. And the Mauritian banks have this money to be able to finance these projects. All our clients who are from Asia have these monies. They might be interested to finance projects, or intra-Africa money as well, through the Mauritius financial system. So I think it's much more that meets the eye than just the 13 billion GDP that we see.
Let's come back to this hub concept and the different ways that it can be, Afsar, can be used as a concept. We've talked about a talent hub, so you get the top people here. There are other ways of doing it, particularly with Africa. And a couple of times the comment has been made that your main market has been historically Europe. The trouble with a lot of African countries is that their main market remains Europe, and there's much less intra-African trade than there could be. So that's an issue. But there are customs issues, there are infrastructure issues, transport issues, and so on. So how does, in your view, Afsar, how does Mauritius solve these problems? Particularly with, yes, you'd like your main historical market, Europe, to recover, but most of the growth surely is going to come from links with Africa.
See, things are changing in Africa. Not only there's new optimism, there's new confidence and new opportunities emerging, but what you're saying is there's a lot of regional groupings happening in Africa. For example, you look at the development in East African community, slowly emerging as one market, one set of rules for customs, and one set of connectivity in terms of mobile phones and stuff like this. But compared to Mauritius, which has been over the many years very internationally focused, either through our exports of textiles, be it for exports of tourism, be it for exports of financial services, we have got that skill base to be very international in our thought process. And when Africa is opening up, you also see a lot of African corporate sector looking to move outside their home territory. They have had the advantage of a huge internal market, which we did not have, but today they're also looking beyond their borders. And today we are in a good position to advise a South African company investing in Kenya. We'll be happy to take a Kenyan company to the west coast of Africa through Mauritius. Like I said earlier, we are the center for capital. We are emerging as a center for capital. You can get your equity out of Mauritius, you can get your private placement, you can get your debts out of Mauritius, plus you have a team of professionals that could take African countries international. I think that's where we are positioning ourselves. And for example, we in BDO today are very much into Africa. We have a seamless operation in 6 countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Madagascar, Seychelles, Ethiopia, out of Mauritius. Plus we work very closely with all the other network of BDO in Africa, especially South Africa. So together we can be a real support to countries looking to do investments outside their home countries.
I'm beginning to feel that South Africa is like a province compared to the headquarters that is Mauritius, the way you guys are talking. I want to talk about tax in a moment, because I think it's an old saying that the more you tax something, the less you will have of it, and the less you tax it, the more you will have of it.
Could I just say something?
Before we go on to that,
yes,
yeah.
Before we go into that, on the opportunities within Africa itself. Because we see that, obviously, the world economy, even the BRICS are slowing down, and so is Europe, as we all know. But I believe that there's sufficient opportunity in Africa itself, be it for investment, intra-Africa investment, there's a lot of money around, and also for trade. If in Mauritius, let's just take Mauritius, we were to source our requirements, be it in terms of raw materials from Africa, and sell to Africa. But the same thing would apply to many, many other African countries, although there may be need for some more transformation of raw materials than we're doing now. There is sufficient intra-Africa trade around so that we would be able to sustain growth within the African countries, irrespective of what's happening around the world. And I think we're not tapping that sufficiently. The intra-African trade is just marginal at the moment. We need to break down the barriers. In Mauritius, we're trying to break down the barriers. There's a barrier to trade in terms of financing, for instance. And here in Mauritius now, we're offering export credit guarantee to our exporters to Africa. There are barriers to the cost of freight. We are offering subsidies at the moment to Mauritian companies exporting to Africa. There are barriers, but these are just some that we've dealt with. A lot of the barriers are at customs, the delay in actually clearing your goods from customs, etc. These things can be done away with quite easily, apart from the infrastructure, which will take time. So the appeal I usually make to my counterparts in Africa is, let's get intra-Africa trade going. And that will be sufficient, irrespective of what's happening around the world, to ensure African prosperity. And that message is going through, and we are seeing some developments in that area, but not quickly enough. Some of the things we want to see, for instance, we are members of COMESA and SADC. We want to reduce the qualifying value added that we need to put in a product so that it qualifies for duty-free, for instance. That the 35% minimum at the moment is a hindrance to exports around Africa. So there are so many things that we can do, and we do need to look at our own game as well, and to see how to facilitate sourcing of raw materials and selling of finished goods around Africa.
Let's get on to the tax issue. Do you agree that if you tax something, you get less of it, and if you reduce the tax, you get more? So there's that old equation that if you reduce the tax enough, the activity that you will generate as a result will more than compensate for not having higher taxes.
Yes, so long as you don't go down to zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What we've done in the past, we used to have very, very high taxation here. Around early 1980s, I think the income tax here was 75% or more. And gradually that's been brought down to 35%. It was brought up to 35%.
Is company tax?
Company and income tax on
Individuals and companies.
And companies. Used to be about 75% in the 1980s. And the economy was really constrained at that time. And so one of my predecessors brought it down to 35%, brought down to 25%, recently brought down to 15%. 15% tax on income, same for corporations and individuals. No capital gains tax, no estate duty, so if you die, you leave everything to your children. That's a very important issue. And VAT at 15%. These are the basic tax fiscal figures here in Mauritius, fiscal rates. And we've found that successively, when we've reduced the taxation, we've always increased the tax revenues, because economic activity more than compensates the fall in the tax rates. And that is also a lesson I think we need to look at and see that some countries complain, we're losing some taxpayers to other countries. We have no army here in Mauritius, so we don't have to have a huge expenditure on weapons, etc. So we try to have the civil service as efficiently as we can. We have issues, like every country, about the efficiency of the institutions and how the institutions will accompany us into the future as a high-income country. But we have these, but we do try to keep our expenditure at a reasonable level so that our population is not overtaxed. At the same time, that with the ease of doing business encourages FDI. This year we'll have a near record in terms of FDI. We've had these high figures for the last 3 or 4 years. And so all this together increases economic activity, brings confidence to foreign investors, and generates the revenues that we need to run the government.
Of course, the other aspect of foreign confidence when they want to do business and move in and out of countries is exchange controls.
Yes.
Do you have them? If so, how?
No exchange controls, either on current account or on capital account, for many, many years now. And again, we've seen surpluses in our foreign exchange account every year. But I must say, though, that we have an issue with the current account, which is in deficit, but that is made up, more than made up by the capital account, by foreign investment, etc. But we do have an issue, and we recognize that. Obviously, every country has issues. No exchange control. It is all based on confidence. The money is very stable. The tax rates are low. The economic policies are clear and set out clearly for the future, and that brings in, I think, the confidence that is necessary, and that we therefore don't need exchange controls.
No army. Do you have a navy? I mean, you're surrounded by the ocean.
We ought to have a navy. We have a coast guard. That is, we are building up now. We are building new ships, etc. Buying new ships, because we have this 2 million square kilometers of marine exclusive zone, and there's huge potential there, and not only for fishing but for exploration. So we are, in fact, slowly building up the coast guard.
Tarun, let's come to you again, and each of you in turn, ease of doing business, dealing with government, opening a business, forms that you have to fill in, and there are lists for everything these days, and the lists of countries where you really how many days does it take, and how many forms do you have to fill in to open?
I got my work permit in a week.
Yeah.
And I can tell you an example. I was part of a special cadre with HSBC where I had to pick up my satchel and move from country to country. I remember a day sitting in Hong Kong and told that you're going to Thailand. Stuff is all gone, everything's packed and gone, and you're waiting for your work permit till 4 p.m. If it doesn't come, you've got to shoot off another country, not here. In fact, I think there are new initiatives to expedite all that, online, make things online, make things seamless, and it's pretty good here. I can tell you it's fantastic. In fact, expats are looking to come here. So it's fantastic here, I can tell you, nowhere else.
Richard, Asfan, your experiences?
Let me say, I think we are 19th now on the globally for
Ease
the
of doing
Ease of
business.
Doing Business World Bank report. And in fact, there is a silent agreement policy, I think, and the Vice Prime Minister may confirm that, for a number of things. So basically, if you don't have your permit within X number of days, then it's construed that you got it. And it is the authorities' the responsibility of the authorities to prove that you should not have got it. So you can move on. And that is very helpful. So as far as the individuals is concerned, so that's quite seamless. As far as companies and funds are concerned, we normally can incorporate a company, a domestic company, within 1 day. Okay, we can incorporate the domestic company.
So with your clients,
Yes.
this is something that you can sell to them. You can say, look,
Obviously we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, obviously we do. Then if you want to incorporate what we call a global business company, that is a company that doesn't do essentially business in Mauritius, but from Mauritius, So for these companies, it might take a maximum of 1 week, but it's more about the KYC, the Know Your Client, and anti-money laundering laws. I think we should not understress the importance of this. As far as ease of doing business is concerned, fine. We can have all the facilities, the permits are there, you can go online, but you need to be able to make sure, as a service provider, we all have to do that the client is genuine, the source of funds is genuine. These elements are very important. And it is this which can, if the client is not ready with the right documentation, which can maybe take a little bit of time. But as far as the procedures here are concerned, this is very seamless. So if you've got clients who have got all these documents, it's not that onerous, but it's just that they have to align everything before we can move on.
Very quickly, if I might add, there was a myth that Mauritius allowed certain things without proper substance. It was a myth, I must reiterate, because it's very robust. And in fact, it's been strengthened further. So I take your point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way it is.
No, we have made a lot of progress in terms of business facilitation, and things are happening very quickly. Few areas, I would say, still work in progress. I think we still have room to improve in certain areas in terms of ease of doing business. But
Like
in
what?
most areas,
What would you say?
for example, we are looking at investments in real estate by foreigners is an area which has opened quite a lot in terms of integrated resort schemes. But for example, on commercial properties, we still have a process to go through. The process can be timely, but it all depends, like Richard was saying, in terms of KYC and submission of information. Like I said, in some areas we will need to improve a little bit, but most areas we score very highly.
Let's come back to the Vice Prime Minister on this. It sounds too good to be true. Maybe it is too good to be true. Perhaps I could just ask a couple of things that occur to me here. It's not a big island. So if you're wanting investment and you're wanting people to come and live here, there can't be that much space for new developments without destroying the natural beauty.
Yes.
And so if you want tourists to come here, you can't overbuild the place, for example.
Yes.
So let's look at that. It is a small island. What if you are so successful that you actually can't cope with the demand?
There is obviously that in mind. There are restrictions. In fact, it's been mentioned a little bit here. There are restrictions on foreigners purchasing property in Mauritius. They can only buy property, if you like, in a specified type of development, which is called the IRS, which is the resort scheme for integrated resort scheme for foreigners, and the RES, which is a similar sort of thing. And also now, if you have a work permit, you can buy in high-rise development. So there are some restrictions, but not that many, because we realize also that it's a genuine wish on behalf of a foreigner coming to work in Mauritius that he would want to buy his property. So you can buy, but there is some restriction because it's a fairly small place. So we need to in fact, to have an equilibrium between the nature and the present lifestyle and the amount of construction that there are. So there is that. But I'd just like to mention one thing which is very important to our development is we managed so far to have a coordinated policy in terms of becoming a hub. We have just wanted to mention that for nearly all African countries now, we have removed pre-travel visa restrictions. That is crucial to what these gentlemen are doing. Because if you may have the best financial structure in the world, but if you cannot meet your client, if he has to send his passport 3 weeks in advance just to get his stamp to come to Mauritius, then it negates whatever else you're trying to do. So we have virtually no visa requirement for the African continent, no visa requirement for China, Russia, the rest of Europe, and so many countries, India, so many countries in the world. That makes of Mauritius a meeting place, a place where you can do business, a place where you can have your board meetings, a place where you can meet your bankers, where you can meet your investors. This is fantastic. And it's a major plus point for Mauritius, which I think hadn't been mentioned so far, and I want to mention. We should not underestimate this. In fact, we had, Ngozi was here recently, last year. She came with a big delegation of, she tried to come with a big delegation, I hope she won't mind me saying that, a big delegation of Nigerian businessmen. And she ended up with very few of them here. And she said to me, we are very upset. Nigeria is a big country, and look, Mauritius imposed visa restrictions, and none of my businessmen could come. I said, oh, that's a big issue. So I took it to the Prime Minister, and a few months later, visa restrictions were removed. And now we had a Gabonese, His Excellency Mr. Bongo was here recently, and he came with a delegation of about 80 people, and no one needed any visa. So that's a big issue for Mauritius, to be the hub for the region, the fact that we can meet people from all over the world here with very little restriction.
What about the capacity of the state to service this growth? Civil servants, certainly coming from a South African perspective, it's broadly thought that one of the big problems that the economy has is labour market rigidity and under-delivery, lack of capacity, a lot of people working but not delivering what they should do.
Absolutely, we have issues. I mean, thank God we have issues, or we wouldn't need a government, So we have issues we have to deal with. One of the issues is the mismatch between our population skills, or maybe in fact their wishes in terms of employment, and the jobs that are available. We have roughly the same number of expatriates, low-skilled expatriates working in our economy as we have unemployed. And that is an issue, because the jobs that are available do not
that's people from other countries who've come here?
Yes. Basically, it's from all over the world, Asia, Madagascar, some from Africa, come to work here in the lower skilled jobs that the Mauritians don't want to take up. That's a problem that we have, and we need to be able to deal with that problem. But also, on our way to becoming a high-income nation, which we want to do within the next 6 annual budgets, so within the 6 years, we do have to raise our game in terms of our institutions. Our institutions need to respond now to the requirements of a highly developed nation. We're talking about our tourism office, we're talking about our investment promotion agency, we're talking about our agency which deals with poverty, how best to translate government's objectives and wishes and policies into action so that we see things happening. We're talking about provision of 24/7 water to the population, which we still can't do. We're talking about reducing the cost of electricity to the population and to our businessmen, which we still need to do. We're talking about renewable energy and how to improve the environment generally. These things, we believe our institutions have to respond now, no longer as a low-income developing country sort of institution, but the institutions that you would see in the highest performing nations of the world. And that is a major issue that we need to deal with as far as the government is concerned.
You mentioned electricity, and before I come back to our panel, I just want, makes me think of power issues and water issues. Is Mauritius blessed by good management and good luck in terms of nature with electricity and water?
I think there is room for improvement, if I want to be very diplomatic. in terms of both we want to privatize the water sector, and we still cannot provide. We provide water to all the population, obviously. We were not providing 24/7 water, and so people have water tanks and stuff like that on the roofs. We need to improve that. We're building quite a big dam, which is costing quite a lot of money, to improve supply, and we need to change the pipes, etc., to reduce wastage. We do need to look at the water sector. The electricity sector is much better, but again, here we need to move to more renewable energy. Our renewable energy percentage is going to be, in the next few years, going to be about 23%, which is reasonable. But as demand grows, that will reduce because we're going to have non-renewable energy. And so we're waiting really for the efficiency of renewable energy to increase so that we can increase our share of that. That is reasonable. But I think we have other institutions also dealing with poverty, dealing with the environment, dealing with the island as a whole that need to be improved. And that is a message that we have received loud and clear from the population and that the government wants to address.
From the perspective of doing business in the country, Tarun, you're British rather than Mauritian, so we've got a nice mix here of people from Mauritius and from outside. As an individual coming in, the experience that you have, so whatever your business is one thing. As an individual who was born here, as an individual coming in, what's it like living here?
People are very friendly to begin with. You don't find that any other places. Very welcoming. I think the food is great. And as I said, my golf game is improving, so you got sunshine. People are envious of you. You know, the UK is raining, cold, and here you have, I think, good climate. So firstly, it's the people that make all the difference. And I think the Vice Prime Minister probably hasn't covered this, but I think that is making all the difference. You can have all the policies, you can have all the incentives, and actually the public service is being incentivized. You don't see that in many other parts of the world. There's an incentive scheme that is going to be run here. But it's the mindset of the people. They want to do better. And that's when an economy does better. If people are not engaged, they're not in sync with everything that's going on, you're not going to do better. So one of the things, whilst the governments have done their bit, I think the people have moved along. And that speaks a lot of volume for the tenacity of the people, the resilience that they show. So it's a place for ease of business. You know, as I said, your licenses come quicker. Somebody mentioned if it's not sort of, Richard, you mentioned, I think, very correctly, if it's not sort of, you don't get a piece of paper in your hand, you consider it approved. Yes, it can be ratified later. So there are things in play that facilitates business, ease of settling down here, very good housing facilities available, roads and infrastructure. Even in my 1 year here, I've seen new roads coming up. I hear in the new budget there are new flyovers coming across Phoenix and other areas. So there is change happening every day, and change is a constant. So that's what makes it easy.
Let me go to Afsar and Richard on this. When you're employing people, so in your business you might have people who say, you say to them, won't you come to Mauritius and work with me? Or they inquire and they say, shall we open a company here? Shall we open an office here? And your answer is yes, obviously, but then what are the questions they ask? It is a long way from anywhere else. I mean, you can't get around that. It has advantages, but it's 3,000 kilometers from Johannesburg, for example. It's an island. What are the questions that they ask?
Most of the time is the rule of law. You know, do they, you know, how far is the rule of law sort of independent from the state? How influential would be the politics into the running of the business? I mean, these are the legitimate questions that they ask. Then it will come to the issue of availability of talent to run the business. And then it keeps going down. I mean, taxation is way down the line. It's not the main criteria. They look at all the other factors, like I said. And then they will see whether they'll get substance here. They will be able to bring their families here. What's the education level? What's the healthcare system look like? When you put all this together, Mauritius does emerge as a good place to be. And obviously, we don't have to sell the sun, the sea, and the beaches anymore, because that's a given. It's what the add-on that come to it is what makes it an attractive place. But these are usually the questions that they will ask.
Like, it sounds like you give them the answers that are reassuring.
Of course. I mean, it's factual. We don't have to reinvent. And also, Mauritius being a democratic state, I mean, if they do have a problem, you have rule of law, you have rights to take justice, you have the rights to criticize the government, you can criticize the ministers well openly, and as long as you're being fair.
A bit too
I
much.
hear the Vice Prime Minister saying yes, yes, but I'm sure you'd rather they criticise than not criticise, keeping you on your toes. Richard, the questions people ask.
I think what Afzar is saying is absolutely that. These are the main questions they ask. But let me show a little bit a different perspective, because I think people need to know that it's not all 100% rosy and everything is nice. And obviously, you got some people sometimes who are not happy with this or that. One thing which we see that people may not be happy with is, what is my spouse going to do while I'm working? Mm-hmm. How is my wife going to occupy her time? My children, do they have the right schools? And this sort of thing. I think the social aspect, the soft element of living here must be taken into account as well. And we always tell clients, we explain to them how it works, and we encourage them to come with their wife before they settle, or if it is a woman with her husband, to make sure that he or she has got a job, is well settled, because that sort of thing is very important. Otherwise, you come here, you want to set up a business, and suddenly, because of your spouse, because you might be traveling a lot over Africa, that sort of thing, and because of the spouse, you may not feel completely at ease. Some people, they want to compare Mauritius with Dubai, or with Hong Kong, or with Singapore, with London, or even with Johannesburg. They might be a little bit disappointed. So they need to know that lifetime is relatively calm. I'm sure Tyrone doesn't have.
I can add a bit of spice to that. In fact, for families with children, let's say about 12 to 15 years of age, fantastic schooling, yes. All the facilities, good clubs. You can do your riding here, swim, golf.
What's the national sport?
Football is, the people are passionate about football, and in fact, to remind, in fact, Vice Prime Minister, you've done some stuff in the budget. New stadia being built. You're beefing up and you're setting up teams here. In fact, you're giving money out to set these teams, revive the old passion. So I think football is certainly there. Politics, maybe people are passionate about that. But I think kickboxing and others, they've run kudos on various sports. So they've been Olympians here. So there's lots going for it. But
then, no, I was just going to say, but I think the other part, you talked about the fact that we are not very close to any other country. This is an important advantage. I think the Vice Prime Minister was saying we are in the middle of the Indian Ocean. We are a bit between Asia and Africa. We've got now a European sort of cultural link as well. That is an advantage. We don't have frontiers. It is an advantage. But we're a little bit isolated. So to fly in and out from here to do business, this is what we always tell clients, take it into account when you're doing business, because the nearest sort of big city is Johannesburg, 3.5 hours away. But then if you're going West Coast Africa, we don't have the direct flights yet. We're working on this, and that connectivity element is working well, but in fact is one area which probably in the future would need to be improved as we really become a financial and business hub for Africa. Then I think that brings that other point of talent. Afzal was mentioning it. We need to be realistic as well. You will have normally most of the talents that you'll require here. However, you may need a software engineer or a high-tech person to work for your company because of your business. And this you may have to ask the person to come over because you may not have all the talent pool that you will require. But that said, this is how most financial centers, most business hubs work. Because if you don't have the talent pool, then you have to bring them over. But for most of the normal jobs that you require in a company, you would find the right people here. That brings just one other point, is that the importance of the way that we develop our hub is that we need to develop it in tandem with other hubs. We need to work in tandem with Johannesburg, with Kenya, Nairobi, with Ghana, with Lagos, with Cote d'Ivoire, because with Dubai, because we should not think that this is the place where everything will happen. Many of our clients, when they come over, they may find here the right place to do the treasury management, the headquarter companies, everything runs out of here as far as the headquarters is concerned. But part of the business or most of the operations may be taking place in Tanzania or in Malawi. So you still need people there. And that's why we need to develop all these partnerships with the different African cities and nations to be able to really offer a global solution to clients when they are going outside of their own country.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you, Vice Prime Minister Javier Duval of Mauritius. He's also the Minister of Finance and Economic Development. He's a busy man, but thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And the rest of our panel, Tarun Gulati, who is the Group President and Chief Executive of Braemar Corporation, Afsa Ibrahim, who is the Deputy Managing Partner at BDO Mauritius, and Richard Arlo, who's CEO of ABAX Services, not ABAX, as I said earlier. Thank you all, gentlemen.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for
very
being,
much.
you know, I can't speak French, you can all speak English, so you've proved what you were saying. This is a very accessible place